Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome repeating and new delegates to Sustainability webinar organized by PATA. This is second Sustainability webinar, and we are here again with Josh Sattler, our honored guest speaker who is Manager of Sustainability Capacity Building from EC3 Global, or CHEC. On today's session, Josh will discuss the first out of the 6 models on sustainability, and we'll focus on the second model, which is on risk assessment. Before I leave the floor to Josh, any question you may have, please send in by typing in the question box, and all the questions will be answered at the end of the session. So this is about time. Josh, I'll leave the floor to you, please.
Okay, welcome everybody from sunny Brisbane, Australia. This is obviously the second part of a 6-part series, and for those of you that joined us for the first part, we spoke about sustainability policy and how important and how much of an integral component of your sustainability management system your policy is. This is the next step from policy. To develop information that will strengthen your policy, procedure and practices within your organisation moving forward for sustainability management. So today we're talking about risk, and we're going to focus on environmental risks more importantly. We're going to talk about risk assessments and how you actually complete these within your organisation. We're going to talk about some processes and also some definitions that align with environmental risk assessment. We'll also have a look at a risk matrix and then talk about some next steps leading into the next webinar, which I'm pretty sure from PATA is the 20th of June. So what is a risk? What is a risk to your organisation? More specifically from an environmental point of view, risk and the way we approach risk within our organisation must be systematic. So it systematically documents your commitment and management of your organisation's environmental and social sustainability performance. It is dependent on a number of aspects, and those include the size of your organisation, the scope of your organisation, and the level of risk that is associated with your organisation. And again, there's that point that takes us back to that first webinar where we spoke about policy, and it must meet objectives of your sustainability policy. So when we talk about risk management, how you actually manage risk, we look at a systematic approach to identifying risks that pose an actual or potential threat to your business. And then, of course, developing strategies and controls to minimise, mitigate and manage those risks identified. So you can see in the little graphic we've got there on the screen at the moment, we've got some gentlemen drinking alcohol in an inflatable pool with some electronic leads going straight across the pool. You can see the risk straight away associated with that and some of those practices in place. Obviously high risk and high risk associated to the individuals and participants within that pool area. So it's now actually understanding your business, understanding what businesses your organisation what risks your organisation may create in the day-to-day running of that organisation. These may also include, and not limited to, when we spoke about environmental risks, but they also may include financial risks, health and safety risks, external or internal risks, legal and regulatory compliance risks, emergencies and accidents. Again, we spoke about environmental, risk to the reputation of your organisation, and risk from business processes and systems for the everyday running of your organisation. So you may ask the question, why is it then important that we know what these risks are? Why is it that we need to document these, and why is it that we need to actually try to control these? Some of the graphics we've got up on the screen at the moment highlight some of these areas. The first one there we can go to, we're looking at a fire within a high-rise building, hotel. the second one down there, we've got actually a fine from the police department, so legal or regulatory compliance issues. The middle one there looks like we've got some sort of contamination or outbreak, biohazard. We've got a degradation to local landscape, and you can see that on the beach there, so they're actually mopping up some oil there. And we've got the last one there, we've got newspapers with regard to propaganda or brand degradation associated with not managing those risks associated within your organisation. So what is an environmental risk? Up on the screen at the moment is the potential for ecological harm or adverse environmental impact to the environment, natural, social and or cultural, as a result of the activities undertaken by an organisation. So in your everyday running of your operation or your organisation, do you have an adverse impact on the environment? Many of us ask this question every day, and some of us, a lot of us, will often say, well, no, not directly. In the circumstance of environmental risk assessment, we'll look at all the indirect measures associated with our organisation's operation. So a risk assessment involves evaluation of known or potential environmental risks, their likelihood and impacts, positive or negative, associated with an organisation's activities, products and services. This can obviously be completed by management. It's best completed in its most simplest form by all staff in all departments of the organisation. And some of you may ask the question, why would all staff need to complete a risk assessment? From the point of view from the organisation, it's very important that every staff member understands what environmental risks are and what it is they actually do when they come to work, and how it affects not only just their work colleagues or the organisation, but also the environment in which their organisation is. Ideally, the next point there is that it's prioritised by a CSR staff member or green team or environmental manager within your organisation. So it's one thing for all staff to identify environmental risks. It's another thing then to develop management and mitigation strategies moving forward, and that's when we talk about the prioritisation of these risks. We like to try and perform these on a bi-monthly basis, so every 2 months perform risk assessments within your organisation. And as I said in the second point there, it's best to be completed by all staff members. In most cases, it's good to alternate these staff members so they're working in different departments and looking at different risks in different areas. So an environmental risk deals with the probability of an event causing a potentially undesirable effect to the environment. The risk assessment is our systematic approach of understanding the nature and level of risk in order to prevent, minimise or mitigate this. The graphic you can see on the slide at the moment, you can see a gentleman on a motorised craft, obviously laying some sort of chemical down onto what looks like a golf fairway or a golfing area. In the event that there is rain and there's runoff occurred into the natural waterway system you can see there, we can see the next step associated with that is obviously some of the fish dying within that local or natural reservoir. So has this been identified as a risk, and what management processes do we have in place to make sure this doesn't happen? Some important considerations to note within environmental risk assessment is that it's not a standalone process, but rather an integral component of your overall sustainability program. And hence why this webinar, risk assessment, is number 2 out of the 6-part series. So first, we'll take it back a step, and we spoke about policy. So within the policy, the risks identified should be considered in the organisation's overall goals and objectives and addressed in the policy. So in this instance, we've identified that policy is an important part of the process. Now we're looking at risk assessment to add as another systematic management tool for our sustainability management process. We need to understand what it is the risks are associated within our organisation. These include high-risk areas identified in your measurement process, which we're going to look at on the 20th, I'm pretty sure 20th of June, and then jumping into action planning. So the actions identified to minimise and mitigate identified risks will form the basis of your action plan and the start of our EMS, or our environmental management system. We need to make sure that our risk assessment is dynamic, and this is why we say it's reviewed regularly and performed bi-monthly. This is obviously updated to include new and evaluate existing risks of your operations. It's important to also consider the potential impacts associated with risks. So these, whether they be planned, accidental and or emergency. So consider the ongoing normal activities of your organisation, your business, but also the potential emergency and accidental situations that may occur. We make a note there that such forward contingency planning has proven to be a major contributor to reducing impacts through prevention and mitigation. And I'll give you an example which we experienced not that long ago in Brisbane. Some 2 years ago, you may have heard about it. I'm looking out the window at the moment, looking at the very river that flooded Brisbane. And a lot of businesses within Brisbane were not prepared, did not identify that river flooding as a risk to their organisation because it didn't happen often enough. I think the last flood was some 35 years ago within Brisbane. And many businesses were detrimentally affected by this. So it's important to understand the risks associated within your organisation, but also consider the planned accidental and emergency risks associated within your destination, within your organisation. Consultation and review is another important aspect. So seek and consider the views of key stakeholders and review and update annually. So key stakeholders may include staff, guests, local people, neighbours, other tourism or industry competitors, suppliers and clients, regulatory agencies, conservation groups, social community groups, etc. So it's important when we're considering risk assessment that these people, that there is some sort of consultation and review process that incorporates these key stakeholders. And that's also, we make reference there to suppliers. So if you do have an organisation that gets supplies from outer regions, which most of Asia does have, it's important to consider some of these aspects as well, because as again, we had it within Australia where Cyclone Yasi went through the eastern seaboard of Australia, wiping out a lot of the sugarcane and banana crops within Australia. So banana crops, if you were supplied bananas from Australia, these all of a sudden were not available. So you were sourcing these through other areas such as Brazil and South America, which can carry a detriment to the pricing structures. So it's important to consider these sorts of aspects. From a chef's point of view, if we're setting up menus as such, these are some things we need to consider, where we actually get our supplies from. So take these stakeholder and review this update annually. We've got a template up on the screen at the moment which looks at a basic template for our risk assessment. You can see in the first column we'll look at what the risk is. We've given an example there, which we've given a fuel spill whilst fueling small outboard power launches or power vehicles. So I've identified that as a risk within our organisation. We then look at the potential impacts associated with that risk. So petrol and oil contamination of nearby mangroves or coral reef, or the harbour of where it is. We then look at risk minimisation or a mitigation strategy. So what we're going to do, or what are some of the things we're going to put in place to manage this as a risk. So we've got some notes down there. So only fuel using hand pumps. We've also got have a 6-metre absorbent boom and absorbent pads ready near the wharf for fuel spill cleanup, and training of all vessel operators and maintenance staff in fuel handling and spill cleanup procedures. So just in those 3 simple columns, we've identified a risk, we've identified the impacts associated with that risk. We've now developed some management or mitigation strategies associated with that. The next 3 columns, we look at the likelihood of it happening, the severity and reversibility of the impact, and then we get to evaluate or prioritise this risk moving forward. So steps for risk assessment. We identify the aspects, we identify the risk, and when we talk about environmental risk assessment, we categorise these within these 6 areas. So we look at them from an energy viewpoint, from a water, waste and carbon. Also we look at social commitment and sustainable purchasing. We then determine impacts, so we understand the associated consequences of those risks. We then identify controls and strategies to manage the outcomes of the impacts. We then must evaluate the risk and determine a priority. We do this by determining the likelihood of the impacts occurring and then determining the severity of the impacts if they were to occur. Some definitions we've got up at the moment. So an environmental risk is the chance of something happening as a result of the activities undertaken by or in presence of a tourism organisation, by your organisation. The aspect is the element of business operations that interacts or has the potential to interact with the environment. So if we hold it there and have a think about it, I'm sitting in a boardroom in Brisbane at the moment, and as most boardrooms across the world and most air conditioning systems across the world, most of these are centrally operated. So I don't have the control to turn this air conditioning unit down, up or off completely. This boardroom may not be used 24 hours a day, but within operational hours the air conditioning is on and running. And like most boardrooms, it is freezing in here. It must be 20 degrees outside, but in this boardroom I'd say it's probably about 18 degrees. So again, is it necessary that the air conditioning is on? And what aspect would be associated with leaving the air conditioning on from an environmental point of view? We're looking at energy usage. So the risk associated with this organisation to have the air conditioning running when it doesn't necessarily need to be running, and definitely at temperatures where it doesn't need to be at those temperatures, is we're going to use more energy. Our energy consumption is going to be high. So that's our risk to our organisation. The impact of that risk is that we're going to use more and obviously pay for more energy. So there is a risk associated to our organisation in not having a management process in place or a mitigation strategy associated with controlling air conditioning. And that directly relates back to energy consumption. So if we talk about energy consumption, the more energy we use, the more carbon we emit, the more of an impact it has on the environment. So in managing a mitigation of energy consumption within your organisation, you can actually increase or better your local environment by not using as much energy. So looking at the next definition there with impact, is any change positive or negative to the environment that is wholly or partly resulting from an organisation's activities, products or services. Some of these activities are use of air conditioning systems. So that's just having a look at that first part, which is energy. So for a simple risk assessment, the slide we've got up on the screen at the moment, we're looking at identifying the risk first and foremost. And we used energy, so I've given another example there where lights are left on. The aspect then, is what we're looking at, is consumption and the excessive use of energy. The impact is obviously increased cost to our business, but the other indirect impact is also associated with the environment with regard to carbon emissions. And we've placed a priority on this as high. So this is where we look at risk evaluation. So we've given it a high priority. So what should we do about it? We need to take into consideration the likelihood and the severity of the potential impacts, consequential ecological, social and cultural effects of this impact, the ability to prevent and or mitigate these impacts, and the reversibility of the impact for each risk identified. We can do this by using a matrix which we've got up on the screen at the moment, where we look at the likelihood of this happening and then the consequences to our organisation. So if we take it back and we look at the air conditioning system, which I gave you an example for, and this is quite common in most organisations throughout the world, what's the likelihood of this air conditioning system being left on in a room where it's not required? At this point in time, I'd say almost certain or daily. So we've given it a likelihood of it happening. So now let's work out the consequence. So is it catastrophic? Will the organisation close? No, not necessarily. Is it major or moderate? Maybe, maybe not. But even if we associate a minor or insignificant priority to this, it still rates as a high priority. So you can see as a simple task of controlling air conditioning systems, controlling lighting, these little things can make a big difference and they need to be managed correctly. hence why we're looking at environmental risk assessment. We've covered off pretty quickly with environmental risk assessment today, and I've given you some examples. I hope from this point we can understand how this then maps back into our first session where we spoke about policy. And this is very much the first step of you understanding what it is you do every day within your organisation, and also delegating some of that responsibility and some of that knowledge back down to each and every staff member to perform and understand their own environmental risk assessment. Once that's done, of course, that comes back to yourself or the person in charge of environmental risk assessment management, and then we can prioritise these risks appropriately in our management processes. So our next step, which is on the 20th of June, we're looking at developing mitigation strategies, implementing management processes, training and awareness programs, and that leads into our action plan strategies moving forward. So next week, or on the 20th, we're looking at measurement processes, and this then verifies leading into action planning. So we'll talk about that just quickly. So we've set up our sustainability policy. We've now incorporated risk assessment into our organisation. So how do we then verify that the risks we've identified are actually risks to our organisation? We can do this through our measurement processes, and this is what I'll be talking to on the 20th of June. So it's important. Thank you again for all of you attending this webinar. But it is important, if you can allocate the time, to go through and attend each one of these, because it does actually give you a sustainability practice and procedure format moving forward that you can implement within your organisation. So thanks again, and once again, any questions, please forward through to my email address, and I'm happy to answer these questions at any time. And right now I'll hand it back to Lee, and thanks again for being part of this webinar, and I look forward to talking to you all again on the 20th of June.
All right. Thank you, Josh. So if you have any question, just typing in the question box. Any question? Just once again, if there's no question, in case you have any question later on, you may please direct your email to Josh at josh.sattler@ec3global.com. I'll repeat the email again, josh.sattler@ec3global.com. Okay, Josh. Thank you, Josh, for your contribution today. It was very fruitful session. Also, thank you very much to all delegates on your kind attention. I hope you all enjoyed today's session, and we look forward to welcome you all again on third sustainability webinar on June 20th. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you.